Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for taking time from your day to join us on this community call. This is the first time we are actually doing a community call with our friends from across the pond. So today's community call, we'll have Dr. Alex Freemantle from the Royal Society Te Apārangi. We also joined by Brian Minihan, who's the ORCID Community and Engagement Lead for the APAC region. And of course, I'm also there. My name's Melroy Almeida, for those of you who don't know me. Now, before we go ahead, I have a few things, but before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we've come together and exchange knowledge. In my case, it's the land of the Yagara Turrbal people in Myanmar. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all the other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. If you would like to acknowledge respects to the traditional owners of the land where you come from, please feel free to put that into the chat window. Now, our agenda for today is as follows. So there's a bit of welcome, and I'll get to the housekeeping shortly, but after that, I'll talk a little bit about the Australian Orchid Consortium, what we're doing, a few updates about it. Then Alex will give us an update on what's happening across the pond in New Zealand. And Brian will bring us up to date with what's happening in the orchid world with Orchid. And then there is going to be a question and answer session. So just a little bit of housekeeping though before I get started. As you notice, everybody can talk, but if during the presentation you keep your mics on mute, that would be most appreciated. During the presentation, you may have questions. Feel free to put them in the chat window. And as soon as Brian's finished with his presentations, we'll start answering those questions. Having said that, if you'd like to ask your questions once we've all finished our presentations, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions, and we can go from there. But apart from that, yes, we'll get started. So the Australian Orchid Consortium was launched in 2016 with about 40 members. In 2024, we've got 44 members, and almost all our members have integrated their systems with ORCID. We've seen a massive jump in 2018 when one of our major funders announced that they're going to be using ORCID in grant applications. That led to a huge jump in the number of integrations that were happening. In 2020, we also launched a maturity model assessment with all our members who had integrated their systems with ORCID. This is primarily to give them an understanding of what level of maturity they were at with their ORCID integrations, what they could do to leverage benefit from it, and how they could go about making it more better so that they could continue to get that sort of benefit that they were expecting. Moving on. So as you can see, with the 44 members in the Australian Orchid Consortium, we've got 3 research organizations, which are CSIRO, or the Commonwealth Scientific Information Research Organization. We do have the Australian Nuclear and Science Technology Organization, along with the Australian Research Data Commons. Then we've got one government organization, which is Queensland Health. We have 38 universities. And 2 of our national funders, the Australian Research Council and the National Health and Medical Research Council, are also part of the consortium. Now, for those of you who love statistics, here's some of it. The consortium itself has about 42 active integrations. I say active integrations because these are integrations that have communicated with the ORCID registry at least once in the last 12 months. Then there have been about these 42 integrations have connected 184,000 ORCID IDs to the ORCID registry. They've added about 1.38 million works. And in the ORCID registry itself, there are about 208,000 or more ORCID records that have a .au domain. So those ORCID records would have an email address in there that has a .au at the end of it. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see the different types of integration in the consortium. We've got a number of custom integrations, but there's also a large number of vendor-related integrations, mostly symplectic and pure, but we do have the open journaling system. There's DSpace, there's Esploro, there's Haplo or Cayuse, and Irma, along with ePrints, Vidatum, ScholarOne, and Vivo. And now, some of the benefits of being in the consortium is it lowers barriers to entry. So it's a lot more accessible in terms of membership fees as well as the support provided. And then what happens is by joining the consortium, members get premium ORCID membership, and the cost itself is reduced by well over 50%. We've calculated that around $5.9 million was saved only in membership costs all the way from 2016 to 2024. Another thing about being part of the consortium is we're part of the community, and there's in-country support available from the AAF. And now I shall pass it over to Alex.
Thank you very much, Melroy.
Let me stop sharing my screen. Here we go.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Melroy. Brilliant to have been invited. I think it's been really cool for kind of both of our consortia to perhaps share some ideas together, discuss each other, and just generally understand that, you know, there's more work going on outside of our countries that we can lean on and discuss and talk about as well. So it was a great idea. Thanks, Melroy. Thanks for inviting us all along. So I'm going to obviously be talking about the New Zealand ORCID Consortium. I am Dr. Alex Freemantle. I'm the ORCID Lead at the Royal Society Te Apārangi. I thought I'd give you an overview as to kind of where we are at the moment, our sort of current standing, and then the New Zealand ORCID Hub, which is our tool that we're very proud of as well. So first of all, the New Zealand ORCID Consortium is managed by the Royal Society. So the Royal Society holds kind of a range of different roles within New Zealand. So we deliver some of the funding, a lot of the funding within New Zealand. We're also the National Academy of Science. We publish 8 journals, and we have kind of science engagement and science media centre tasks as well within the whole of the kind of Royal Society organisation. But within that, we're also the kind of an expert advice department, which is where I sit. So I'm the ORCID Lead. I help to manage the New Zealand ORCID Consortium alongside some support staff within my team, but also an ORCID advisory committee as well, which are made up of a range of different individuals from across the science sector. Our consortium was created in 2016, and then we kind of saw an increase in numbers in 2017, and we are, well, I can say slightly different. We're kind of very different to Australia in terms of our consortium is completely funded by the New Zealand Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. So that includes the project of the consortium itself, so the running of the kind of day-to-day running of the consortium, but also the actual ORCID membership fees as well are completely funded by MB. So we are very lucky to have that. It creates kind of a few different considerations that I'll talk about in the next few minutes, but ultimately just really, really pleased and thankful to MB for that. We've just signed another 5-year deal with them, so we'll be continuing to be funded by MB for the next 5 years, which is great. So this is just a map of all of our members. We have 45 members dotted around New Zealand. We're proud of the kind of spread and the kind of range of different organisations that we have across the whole science and research sector. So we have all 8 of the New Zealand universities. We have all of the Crown Research Institutes, a range of government departments, some of the independent research associations, organisations, as well as some smaller research consultancies and institutes of technology and polytechnics as well. So yes, we do feel like we cover a whole different array of research organisations, which helps when we are trying to sort of help a load of different organisations that have different needs, different sizes, different number of staff members, sorry, and we're trying to help them to utilise their ORCID memberships as best we can. So it's great. Some current ORCID statistics. First of all, the graph on the right, very pleased that it suggests an exponential rise since 2016-17 when the consortium was developed. So kind of evidence that our members and organisations across New Zealand are interacting with ORCID, hopefully kind of off the back of some of the support that we can offer. So we have about 11,000 users in New Zealand with New Zealand in their biography, 27,000 with some kind of affiliation that bases them within New Zealand, and then about 33,000 records associated with the .nz email address. So much smaller figures than you guys in Australia, but hopefully rising, hopefully increasing, and just trying to support a kind of smaller market, essentially. So these are stats taken from the member portal, so useful for checking trends and checking how we're kind of trying to develop, certainly when we think about the government funding as well. Some more statistics. So as I say, 45 consortium members starting in October, so that's our renewal date. The last time I checked, that put us 8th largest. That may well have changed. And we have about 34 of those members with active integrations. So this is one of those considerations that I mentioned around being fully government funded, is that some organisations are a member without necessarily having a current active integration. So that's one of the key drivers, one of the key tasks for us at the Royal Society, is to try to ensure that as many of our members as possible are kind of utilising that free membership that they've got themselves. We're getting there, and that's certainly one of the key tasks for the coming year. Lots of work's being added, which is brilliant, often from repository systems or through a tool that I'll talk about in a minute. And then the other thing that we're really proud of in New Zealand is the funding items. So 4,326 funding items added because the Royal Society Te Apārangi is such a large funder or a large kind of organisation managing a lot of different funds within New Zealand, as well as the Ministry of kind of MB, Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, are also handing out a whole different array of funding. It means that we have two active organisations that kind of help to control a lot of the funding in New Zealand. And that means that we can lean on both organisations and ensure that they're writing as much information and as kind of detailed information as possible to ORCID records, which is great. Sometimes, or in the past, Brian's told me that we're only behind USA in terms of the number of funding items being added. So that's great, and hopefully we can build on that, perhaps with another one of our funders, the HRC, as well. So in a similar way to kind of the things that Melroy's just discussed, we've got a whole different array of integrations used by our consortium. So 6 of our universities are using Symplectics and have it kind of integrated with ORCID. We've got the Flexible Learning Association of New Zealand, a journal using open journal systems, as well as a couple of our universities as well are publishing and writing that to ORCID records. The ORCID Affiliation Manager, as well as some kind of custom in-house integrations too. So the MB funding PITO system was kind of around a couple of years ago, and they've just started that back up again, which we're really pleased with. So that is a way for individuals to use their ORCID, the information from their ORCID record to apply for funding, and then that funding is also written to their record when they're successful as well. So that is working very, very well at the moment, which we are pleased with. We also have a couple of repository systems that are new in place at the moment, and hopefully developing those in the next kind of year or so as well. And finally, the New Zealand ORCID Hub. So this is a tool that was developed by a team out of the University of Auckland and members from the Royal Society Te Apārangi. Is a free web application that essentially allows our members to read and write to their stakeholders' ORCID records. So because it is free and because hopefully it is kind of easy to use, it means that large and small members from within the consortium are able to interact with the ORCID API much more easily than perhaps they would have done. So instead of a smaller organisation, one of those research consultancies, having to develop their own system or kind of find different solutions, they can just come straight to us and we can set them up with a New Zealand ORCID Hub account. So obviously kind of record holder permission and security is still paramount to that too. So the Hub saves researchers times because they don't need to be adding information to their ORCID records themselves, as well as it showing a trustworthy source with any of that information added. And then also it saves the organizations money as well, so they don't need to, as I say, develop any of those costly ORCID integrated systems or pay someone else to do this. We have a tool ready and waiting and available to them. That's not to say that other tools kind of can't do similar things, and so that's why you see our members using other integrations as well, which is brilliant too. So this is just a screenshot of the kind of the homepage. Mine looks a little bit different than some of the other admins, but essentially it's, as I say, this free online tool. All information from kind of all of the ORCID data types can be added to ORCID records, so affiliations, funding distinctions, and all of those professional activities. We find mostly affiliations, funding, and distinctions as being the sort of three main ways, three main data that is being added to records, but all of it is available. We're yet to have anyone add a research resource, which is something we would like to perhaps try to work on coming up. Just a few more minutes on the Hub. So there's 4 different ways to write to records. So first of all, a user invitation. So this is inviting just one individual member of staff at a time and giving them kind of a detailed affiliation. This would be used for some of our smaller members who perhaps only have a few members of staff, and therefore they would be adding information to their staff's ORCID records. To Akiri, so this is our version, our kind of federated identity service. This is used by all of the universities and almost all of the CRIs as well. So when an employee signs into the Hub, they can either use their ORCID credentials or they can use their institutional To Akiri logon details if they have them. If they do that, then an affiliation is automatically written to their ORCID record because the Hub is able to link their ORCID to their To Akiri credentials. This is what we call a vanilla affiliation. So it's kind of simple. It just says that right now they work at that institution. So in an ideal world, that can be improved and kind of provide more detail by research staff at the university or the CRI at a later date, but it's just good to have that affiliation and that trusted link. There's also we have our own New Zealand ORCID Hub API as well. So this just enables an automation. Everything that an admin can do themselves manually, the ORCID Hub API can do automatically. So some of our larger members, again, who have a bit more kind of IT departments or finances essentially to pay someone to kind of set this up, we'll be using that. So some of our larger universities. But then the method that most individuals use is the JSON or CSV file upload. So as long as the JSON file or the CSV file is properly formatted, then the individual can be adding information to their staff or stakeholders' ORCID records really quite simply, as long as the staff member gives them permission to do so, which is done through an email from the Hub. So this is kind of how simple it can be with a CSV file. So this is just a test template for adding something called the Prime Minister's Science Prize. As long as those required fields are filled and the email is correct, then you can be adding information to staff records really quite easily. And you don't need a level of technical ability to do that, which again is one of the benefits. And this is kind of how it looks. So that's one of the professional distinctions, one of the affiliations, it's my own, and then some of the funding that gets written. So you can provide all of the information that ORCID may well kind of allow, essentially. So the metadata can be detailed, and it can be done easily without too much of technical knowledge. So in terms of our plans, just briefly, we kind of spoke about that ORCID activity within the consortium. So we would like more active consortium members, and that's something that we'll work on. Perhaps there's things across in Australia that some of our members might look to see and use and think they might kind of gain some benefit from as well. And then also provide a wider range of webinars and events. So perhaps that could be a question I ask in a minute in the Q&A, kind of what events have worked well for the Australians, and how, kind of which ones could we pick up in New Zealand to support our members. And then because we are MB funded, we always need to run it back to the government. So continue to meet some of those work programme expectations, which is always just running alongside our support for our members. Thank you very much. I will as well stop sharing and pass on to Brian. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Alex. I see there's a question from Jacinta in the chat. Do you want to address that now, or want to wait till after my bit? What do you think? Gracious AAF host, what's your preference there?
We'll wait for you to go ahead, and then
Okay,
yes,
very
I'll
good.
answer
Yeah.
that. So yes, let's do
Okay,
that.
sure. All right, I'll go ahead then. All right. Lovely. Thank you very, very much for inviting me. My name is Brian Minihan. I'm the engagement lead for both the Australia and New Zealand consortia. I'm based in Hawaii, so we share time zones, but working hours, but different days. So it's Wednesday for me, but good to be with you all. I'm just going to talk a wee bit about some changes to the ORCID record and how it looks, and things that you may or may not be aware of, and also provide a bit of international context of what's going on elsewhere in ORCID, and some of the other sort of projects we're up to with partners across the world. Just to let you know how we function, we generally try to concentrate on 4 of our strategic themes. So that's value to researchers, value to member institutions, such as the 44 and 45 in ANZ. Upholding the trust and integrity. As you know, research integrity is a big concern everywhere, and ORCID as a data handler really puts a lot of stress on making sure that that data is handled with trust. And you may or may not know, I think there's about 20 million ORCID records globally. So as you might imagine, India and China have quite the largest number of ORCID records, but then the value of ORCID comes through membership. So the Australia and New Zealand consortia have done a wonderful job of really providing value to their nations. We don't see a lot of membership, say, in China, India, and some of parts of the world. So we're really trying to right that balance by providing the APIs that go along with membership to a larger part of the world. All right. We have come up with, it's kind of a simple interface for doing essentially like an executive summary of an ORCID record. This was actually requested by a lot of publishers who, when they receive manuscripts or they receive an authenticated ORCID ID, as you may know, some folks have, like 200 works. They have tons and tons of information in their ORCID record. So this is a kind of a summary view of an ORCID record, and it is live now. So if you have your ORCID URL with your 16 digits, if you type in summary after that in a web browser, you should be able to view your own ORCID record summary. And what this does is it kind of splits up all the information in your ORCID record and provides a neat summary of how much of this have you added and how much has been added by the member API, and what types of information, education, funding, peer review, you name it. So I just wanted to share that with you. One of the things we were noticing with ORCID records is, as you may know, I think quite a lot of people globally maybe started or opened the ORCID record, in kind of a rush when they were submitting a manuscript or they needed to do something, and researchers are busy, and so maybe that record just kind of sits there for a bit. earlier this year, we put in like a pop-up when people were creating their ORCID record to kind of prompt people to add their employment. And so we've seen a rather large jump in, self-asserted affiliations, and that's okay. But it's really you can see quite a market improvement, and we think this is good because employment, education, all those affiliations are really a large part of why people think that ORCID might be useful in kind of looking at researchers' profiles and what they've done. We created this slide to kind of show the kind of various phases of ORCID records. I kind of think of this as like the ORCID record maturity model, Melroy, kind of like that you guys did in Australia a few years ago. So the more information and the more sources that add information to the ORCID record really kind of accumulates trustworthiness over time. So in that example that I was saying, you might have a researcher open an ORCID record and then, oh, you want me to add my where I work. Okay, I've done that. And then a bit later, I might figure out that a few of my publications in some small journals could be added via Crossref, and on and on. And as more folks could take advantage of, say, funders adding information similar to MB, which I have to say is quite unique. Not many funders do that. So kudos to New Zealand and MB for that. Then we kind of see an increasing amount of trusted information in the ORCID record. Finally, I've been with ORCID for 6 years. And the ORCID record and say metadata has not changed in, I think, 5 years. Part of that is because we based the ORCID record on an organization on a schema that was headed by Kazurai, and those guys have disbanded. So unfortunately, a lot of rich information that researchers produce, we haven't been able to fit that in the ORCID record. But we're working on kind of finding a way around that, and I'm very excited because I think this will have a large impact on HAS researchers. So that's anyone who's social sciences, humanities, and arts. So stay tuned for that. And of course, that should be a very, very big deal when we increase the work types available. Okay, so enough of the record. We're going to align with the Sustainable Development Goals. We're working on how to do that, and essentially what we want to do is for our next strategic planning phase. So you remember those 4 themes that we concentrate on and try to align everything we do with. That's part of our 2020 to 25, I think, strategic planning phase. So in 26, we'll be doing something else, and we really want to incorporate this. So we're working together with our board at ORCID to see how we can best do that. Okay. Now, you guys, as 2 of the very most active consortia in the world, and a lot of folks look up to the work that you do in the Americas and Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I don't know if you're aware that it is possible to have a regional consortia at ORCID now. Originally, these were just kind of nation-based, but of course, there are parts of the world with very small nations that can't possibly, have, say, 5 to 10 members and find an organization that's capable of doing the good work that AAF and Royal Society Te Apārangi do as consortia leads. So we have one regional consortia at the moment in within ORCID. That is the Latin American Consortia. So they have members from, what is it now, 7 countries. It's headed by the organization confusingly sometimes known as Consortia in Colombia. And they do a wonderful job. They're only about 2 years old, I think. But they're almost at 100 members. And they are our largest non-Anglophone consortia. So just to give you a sense of, say, the Latin American Consortia, Australia, New Zealand, there are 25 other consortia in ORCID around various parts of the globe. This is another thing I just want to bring up. I don't know if you know, but we do collaborate a lot with the other open research infrastructure folks, such as DataCite and Crossref, because they are persistent identifier folks like ORCID is. So have a look, keep an eye out for some of our events. I sign up for them, like, so for instance, this one, which is last November, this was a good one. I signed up for it, but I got the recording. In Hawaii, it's very rare that I will be able to make any of these, which, you know, may be the case for you guys as well, but it's always interesting to see, you know, what the 3 organizations are up to in collaboration. All right, and finally, I saved the most boring bit for last, privacy and cybersecurity. I just want to share this. You may be wondering why there's a strange manuscript on there, which, you know, obviously you're not going to see in an ORCID record. We're just using this example, and we're not shaming or anything, but I don't know if you're aware of the case that happened where the British Library kind of got caught in a ransom sort of scenario where a lot of the data belonging to, I don't know if it was the whole British Library or, but, you know, a certain aspect, but essentially, you know, they couldn't access the data that they were responsible for, and, you know, the folks that were in control of it or pirating it, you know, we're asking for a financial reward. So that's no good. So we've been going through a big plan of how to really make sure that our cybersecurity is top notch, because we certainly don't want, you know, the data from the ORCID registry to fall into a similar situation. And we have a new dedicated privacy officer. Her name is Ellen. I can't remember her last name, but she's based in the UK. She's been at a couple. I think she was at our last consortia meeting, Alex and Melroy. That was quite interesting. She kind of detailed what she plans to do, and I think most of all, so we're going to be rewriting our privacy policy, and she'll have a big hand in that. And so, yeah, so stay tuned if you're interested. And thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Brian and Alex. Those were great presentations, lots of interesting information over there. And so now we have our question and answer session. For those of you all who haven't attended a community call in the past, ideally, the aim of establishing the community call was to have our members join in and ask us any question about ORCID or ORCID-related stuff under the sun. I might not necessarily have the answers. I don't know if Alex or Brian may, but between the 3 of us, we definitely know enough people who may be able to give us the answers to the questions you're asking. So I'll start off with Jacinta's question. Does ARC have a similar integration that writes funding details to ORCID profiles if a grant is awarded? I would like to say yes, but the answer is no. They do have an integration that reads from ORCID records. And I do know that I have discussed with them the possibility of writing information back into ORCID records on successful application. So once the applicant is successful to have that grant information written back, they are working on it. I don't know when it will go live. I'm hoping sometime soon, but again, I can't. As we all know, government-funded bodies tend to go at their own pace, so it'll happen when it happens. But it is something that is definitely and actively on their radar, so it will happen. Then the
Melroy,
second question.
Can I ask you a question about that? So for those of us in New Zealand, the Ministry of Education have just released a consultation around unique identifiers within the PBRF process, Performance-Based Research Fund. This will only mean something to some of those faces that I can see out there at the moment. We would, of course, like that to be ORCID as the unique identifier. They have currently their own plans that will be an internal custom identifier, essentially. So in terms of the work from the ARC, what was that process like to, first of all, develop the initial use of ORCID within that kind of funding application process? Is it successful? Is there, I know there isn't a mandate, but is there anything kind of encouraging individuals to use ORCID within that sort of national grant funding process? Kind of what can you tell us about it, essentially?
So there are a few reasons behind that, at least with regards to ARC. They were one of the first stakeholders, along with the peak bodies like the Australian University Librarians, the Australasian Research Management Society, and ARC and NHMRC were some of the initial stakeholders that looked at establishing an ORCID consortium in Australia. So ARC were quite taken with it, with the idea of having an ORCID ID, as in disambiguating people's names, being able to import that information into their systems. It did take them a while after the consortium was established to have that up and working. But ARC have always said that they wouldn't want to mandate it. Rather, they would like to try and make it as easy as possible for researchers. So researchers would choose to use ORCID ID as a way of applying for grants, because it just saves them about 4 to 5 days of actually putting that information in and preparing a CV before they go about applying for grants, as in actually writing down a proper proposal comes much later after that. But they're able to do that in about 5 to 10 minutes, as opposed to initially where they would take 4 to 5 days to get that done. And there's also been a study. So the last cost benefit analysis, that report that was out and that was done by More Brains, they did a whole case study on ARC. And one of the things they found out was, as researchers kept on applying for grants, the first time a researcher applied for a grant and was successful, it took them about 15 days or 18 days the first time. The second time they applied for another grant, it took them 6 days to complete it. And it kept reducing. So the more they used it, the more they applied it, the amount of days kept reducing. It hasn't gone to zero, and I don't think it will ever go down to zero, but it keeps reducing, which shows the efficacy of having that. Now, they also had a review happen with the reporting exercises that are done in Australia. And one of the things strongly pointed as a recommendation of the review was to use persistent identifiers in getting higher education institutions to report back on research excellence. So that is something that is being looked at. So all these things point to the fact that persistent identifiers, especially persistent identifiers like ORCID, which is quite well used around the world, will be used by ARC and NHMRC for a long time. So yes.
Brilliant.
Does that answer your question, Alex?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we're just putting together a consultation response at the moment, so that's very helpful. Thank you.
Cool. Not a problem. And so I believe, Ryan, this is a question that you can take. Are there plans to develop the summary page further? That's from Jerry from University of New South Wales.
Yeah, Jerry, not quite sure what you mean. I think at the moment this is it, but we're just at the moment just putting yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
No, it's more, I mean, I didn't really have any specific ideas around how to develop it further, but even just the idea of, I mean, for people who, for example, have 100 works in there, or say 100 journal articles, even like a pie chart of what are the journals that they are.
Like a visual. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, like a visual. Maybe ORCID isn't the place for that, but certainly would be a good summary of your works.
Yeah, no, indeed. Yeah, I'll certainly pass that on to our user interface folks and product folks. But I think at the moment they're just kind of seeing what people think. And to be fair, when I talk with people, this is why I put it in here. I think a lot of people are unaware of it, to be honest. And the few people that I've talked to that are aware of it, sometimes they'll say like, well, I don't want to have, I don't know, we don't want a contest between like, most of I don't have my stuff coming in from members or, API, and I shouldn't be shamed for that. And I don't think we're not trying to shame people on the content in their record at all. It's just kind of like, honestly, it just came from the publishers who were they would get these ORCID records especially in the STEM, where you'd have 150 works and God knows how many peer reviews and all that. And so that's really the point, was just kind of to provide a condensed thing. But yeah, that's a good shout. So yeah, at the moment, nothing right now. Yeah.
I was just going to ask one other question as well. I noticed on your page, your summary page, I can see that I didn't realize that you could actually, your GitHub ID, and it looks like that's been certified by GitHub. Is there also the write back to ORCID from GitHub? Is that a function that's ORCID have?
No, I think, the GitHub integration is quite new. So that's actually just pretty recent, just so that's the other identifier part. So that did come from GitHub, but other information I think is kind of yet to be determined, so we'll hope to see more from GitHub on that. Yeah, but yeah. And those other identifiers, they have to be, you can't do that. You can't add that yourself. So for example, Alex, like your whatever identifier comes up in the PBRF, like you couldn't just add that in your ORCID record. It would have to come from a external. So you can see in my one, so Scopus added my Scopus ID. If you had a researcher ID, that would have to come from from, is it Clarivate? I can't remember who owns them now. Whatever, somebody owns them, but yeah.
So I think what Brian's trying to say is, with these personal identifiers, it has to be through an API.
Yes.
So that could either be through your institution, which does it through its repository or research information management system, or it could be not publishers, but I think entities like Scopus or Researcher ID, or any one of those that use the API to actually write that back into your ORCID record. Any other questions?
We have a question from pre-registration, which is, are there any plans for a regional consortia in the APAC region?
Ooh, Alex, you want to take that?
Alex?
I will take that. So I think this is something I've mentioned to my consortium in the past. We have the permission from MB to approach some Pacific Island organisations, namely University of South Pacific, which is a university spread across a range of different Pacific islands, and the University of Samoa, National University of Samoa, and the University of Fiji as well. So we are very, very pleased and very excited to kind of start to make those conversations. We have begun those conversations, and from MB themselves, they would be happy to continue the funding for those other organisations from within the Pacific Islands. So in terms of plans, yes, there is very much plans. We are kind of doing our best, trying to show the worth of ORCID. It's all about showing, how these organisations within the Pacific Islands can actually benefit from ORCID. And that's the part that we're at the moment, trying to show them why they want to join. So yes, there is plans. Very, very excited that there is plans. When that comes into fruition, not quite sure just yet, but we'll keep you all informed.
That would be very exciting. And, you know, just for a global reference, so there's only one regional consortia at the moment throughout the world, although there's many parts of the world, you know, that you could make a case for an existing consortia. So like, for example, that there was a consortia in Colombia. They were really keen on expanding, and they do really quick work. And so they just managed to get some documentation going, and there they went. But they're the only ones in the world thus far. But we'd love to see one in your neighborhood. So.
Beautiful. Thanks for that, Brian. And Alex, any other questions? It doesn't have to be what we presented. It could be anything about ORCID, anything about PIDs. You could just ask us anything else. Like I said, if we don't know, I'm sure we might find somebody who may be able to give us the answer. So yes, now's your chance. And that was the idea behind the community call when we first started it. It was for members to ask whatever questions they had, not necessarily related to what we've presented.
While people think of a question, I have another question for you, Melroy, and possibly anyone else from the Australian consortium. So we are still trying to develop sort of an events program, or workshop program, whatever you kind of want to call it. So what events have you guys done maybe in the last year or couple of years that you think have been useful, either from your own point of view, Melroy, or from your members' points of view as well?
So what we've been doing is we generally have a program of work that we kind of do at the beginning of the year, if I'm not mistaken, Emily. So one of the things that we do is, and that is based on the feedback we get from our members when we do our focus group, or in the past, it has been surveys. So what exactly they would like to see. We found that in the past, we've done a number of webinars, but we've also done a lot of coffee chats. So these are about 15 or 30-minute sessions. They're really short, they're really sharp. It's just giving members a quick update. Sometimes it's talking about if there's something important we'd like to send out, we do it through a coffee chat, which is about a 10-minute session with 5 minutes for Q&A, something they can listen to when they're on a break, or they can just log in if they've got about 15 or 20 minutes, and that's about it. Sometimes it's these community calls where they get to ask as many questions as they want, which may or may not necessarily be related to what we are presenting, but it provides them an opportunity to actually ask things. And then wherever possible, we do try and interact with some of our other consortium members, like how we reached out to yourself and Brian this time to do the community call. Occasionally we've interacted with Brian or some of the vendors to do joint webinars and see if that is useful. So it depends on what sort of feedback we get from our members, and accordingly we tailor our comms program to match it. But in the past, it's always been community calls, which have been quite well received, as well as the coffee chat sessions. And the best part about the coffee chat sessions is because they're bite-sized, we then upload it up to YouTube and keep passing that link on with each of our newsletters so that members can always go back and refer to it, because that information doesn't generally change. It's more or less information that remains quite regular or up to date, I guess.
Brilliant. That sounds great. Thank you, Mel.
Right, we've got 8 minutes left to go. And so if there are no further questions, I'll call an end to this session. And I'd like to thank Alex and Brian for taking time to be here with us and presenting. I'd also like to thank all our attendees for staying this long and listening to us talk about ORCID. But I would also give special thanks to Emily from the AEF for organizing the community call for us, making sure the invites were sent out, getting everything sorted. That is a fair bit of work. So thank you very much for that, Emily. Ooh, there's a message. And yes, once again, look forward to seeing you at our next community call. Just because it's an Australian community call doesn't necessarily mean that our friends from across the pond can't attend it or ask us questions. So if you'd like to subscribe to our newsletters, because that is generally where we post information about what sort of activities we'd be doing next, feel free to subscribe to it. And when the next one happens, please attend. And with that, I think we'll all have an extra 5 minutes back in our day. So have fun.